Welcome to the Social Chameleon Show, where it's our goal to help you learn, grow, and transform on your path to becoming legendary. Listen, guys, I need to make a confession today. I've interviewed PhDs, I've federal judge, CEOs. I scored in the top 1% on my ASVAB, the military entrance exam, and I scored in the top percentages of other entrance exams I've taken, and some trade schools and stuff I applied at. I took AP English in high school, and I had honors classes all through schooling. But here's the truth. I never read a single book in school, ever. In fact, for the first 20-ish years of my life, I didn't know how to read properly. I couldn't spell to save my life. I didn't know how to use phonics, sounding words out. I was a product of the 3Q method. I really started to figure this out while I worked at Ford. I was talking with some friends about the word speedometer. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They started laughing. They said, "Tyson, it's speedometer." I wasn't trying to be funny. I literally didn't know how to connect the letters to the sound. I've been moving through life memorizing the shapes of words rather than learning how to actually read them. Today, we're going to talk about how I think I was a smart kid. I think others would agree with that. And how I was able to navigate the entire education system without learning how to read. Why the whole word method failed millions of us, and how I eventually hacked my own learning to get to where I am today. If you've ever felt stupid because you struggle with reading or spelling, this episode is for you. Let's get on to it. So, the speedometer story. I think this is kind of one of those moments where I kind of started to realize that I think I did have a problem. I never really thought about it much. I can't recall thinking about it much. So I got hired at Ford. I was working at some other at Mitsubishi before as a salesman. I got hired at Ford, and part of the training process was I had to read all these manuals on the cars. And so, I'm reading through the manuals. Like, what's a weird word? Speedometer and tachometer. I was like, well, strange words, but it's like, maybe that's more technical terms. I didn't know nothing about it, because as we'll get into talking about it, I learned what they call the 3Q method, or the whole word. So if I never seen a word before and it was unfamiliar to me, I didn't understand how to sound it out. And for whatever reason, in this instance, speedometer didn't connect in my brain as speedometer. I guess because when you say it, speedometer, versus when you look at it, speedometer, I must have never seen that word and understood it. So that's one of those instances where I started realizing, I really kind of don't know how to read. Not that I'm illiterate. I'm not illiterate. But the way I was taught to read left me at a little bit of a disadvantage when I seen new words. And this was back in early 2000s. I was in my early 20s. And they're really, we had computers and stuff, and I had a Palm Pilot and things, and a pager, and like a primitive kind of cell phone, flip phone, and Nextel, if you guys remember those. Unless you were in front of a computer with internet access, you really didn't have the ability to look up words or like if you ever go to a dictionary now online, you can hit the little speaker button and it'll pronounce the word for you. So I didn't have that capability, which I use a lot today. But this is kind of one of those things. And then I remember, I always ask my friends sometimes, simple words to spell, but you got those words where you just kind of quite don't know what, like this is said this way, like scent, right? Like, oh, there's a smell, or there's change, or, so it's one of those words where you kind of don't know. So I'd ask my friends, once in a while, hey, how do you spell security? My friend's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. He's like, sound it out. I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to sound out words. And that's the thing I got a lot in school, is like, oh, just sound it out. Or if my parents would sound it out, I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I do not know how to sound out words. So I was born in Hawaii. And then for a small period of time, I moved. My dad was in the military. I moved to we lived in Virginia and Georgia. We kind of went back and forth for a few years between those two places. And that's when I was in like preschool, kindergarten, first. And I think about halfway through second grade, we moved back to Hawaii and stayed there the whole rest of the time. But it must have been there. It was when that school district or whatever it was, I don't quite remember. And everybody I've talked to doesn't quite remember, but whatever it was in that school district, I do have some kind of memories of us, they call sight words, where they have a picture on the chalkboard, and you would have to, say what that is, and then you'd kind of tie the picture with the word. And through my research and doing this episode, I never kind of realized all these things. I never really looked much into what entailed reading and whatnot. And I was lucky I didn't have to teach my kids to read, because they kind of got it from preschool and stuff. They got the sounding out of the words. So I never really kind of learned that. So that just must be how that school district taught. And then when I moved back to Hawaii, they taught sounding out words. So I do remember, like, second and third grade, I had to go to a remedial reading class, and I didn't understand, and I kind of think back, obviously, the memories aren't quite accurate. It's just what I remember about what I remember. But I do remember being in this remedial, like, English class, like, trying to read. And I don't remember being in there long. And it was weird, because I had to go to this class, and I was like, why am I in this class? Like, I feel like these people don't, they're not very intelligent, or maybe they had dyslexia or something that was stopping them from reading. It's like, I can read, I just don't know certain words, So, and all my other classes were whatever they call them now, gifted and talented or whatever. I don't know what we used to use, honors, or whatever we used to use in school. And like I said in the intro here, I had AP English in high school. And I didn't understand, like, why am I in AP English? But I would just be able to score well enough to keep getting in these classes. So it was strange, when you looking from the the outside in. It's like there's no way you can't read. Of course, I could read. I was not illiterate, right? It was just unfamiliar words. I had no idea how to do this. And then also the thing, my dad used to use reading as a punishment. I'd get in trouble. He's like, go sit down on the dinner table, and I want you to read the dictionary. Or sometimes it'd be like, just pick a book on the shelf and sit there and read it. And sometimes part of that, he wanted me to read out loud. Well, when you don't read too well, reading out loud, I hated reading out loud. I'm sure you guys out there remember. I'm not sure if other countries do this, but in America, we used to, go like a paragraph at a time or something like that. And I just hated that. So coupling that, I wasn't good at reading, and then I would read fast. I'm sure, with some of these episodes, and I try to read something that, it gets real fast, and then I come to a word, I kind of stumble a little, and it slows down, and I'm getting better at slowing down. I think that's a lot of the problem is I need to slow down. My brain is processing faster than my mouth is saying it. Plus, if I come to a word, or if I know a word's coming up, or I've been practicing, or I've kind of been stumbling on, or I'm going to stumble on it, then I get a little nervous even to this day. But that was a problem in school, right? I would sit there, and I kind of really couldn't pay attention if we were doing this thing, because I'd have to be practicing. I'd be like counting, right? Like, okay, 3, 4, 7. Okay, I'm the 12th guy. Okay, I didn't count out 12 paragraphs. I got to look at this paragraph. Okay, is there any words in here I don't know? Let me practice reading this in my head. So when it comes to me, I can read it. My hands would be just dripping with sweat. I'd be so nervous, and then that just wouldn't go well. And so that, plus reading as a punishment and whatnot, it's just like, I just do not want to read. The crazy part is I love learning stuff. I wanted to get, I wish I had those sets of encyclopedias back in the day. I just always wanted one of those, because there's so much cool information. And then when the internet came out and I got a computer and stuff, we had the CDs of like the Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica. I used to just go through all that. But when it came to big blocks of words, I was like, whatever. I would skim and different. I came up with different techniques and different things to kind of get the gist of things. So even with like podcast guests, when I have a podcast guest and I see like their last name, or even sometimes their first name, I'm like, oh man, I get super nervous about that. And I make sure I ask them to pronounce it. I make sure I write it down, like how I hear it. So when I write it down, and sometimes I'll have to go back to the recording and listen to how they say their name, and I practice. So I am working on it. And this is kind of something I wanted to talk about here. That's why I wanted to do this. I seen a video on Instagram. I guess some states or school districts, whatever it is, I was kind of hard to find information on who still does this. I had a hard time finding exactly what school district still does, but I saw a video of somebody was filming in a classroom. The kid must have been, I don't know, 7, 8, 9. I don't think he was older than 10 years old. And the teacher was sitting there and he's reading a book and he comes to a word he doesn't know. He's just sounding out. She's like, stop doing that. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, no, that's the problem I had. I didn't know people still did that. I didn't know this was a thing. And like I said, I never really connected this together till I got older. Like I didn't learn that and I didn't think much of it, because I didn't have any problems really, right? I was able to pass through school without a problem. Like I said, I scored high on my SATs and, the ASVAB. And I remember applying to this computer school and the guy was like, this is the highest score we've ever got on the test. Like you got to come here. And I was like, whatever. And it just didn't, for whatever reasons, it didn't work out. So, when you kind of pass through life without really encountering problems, I never thought much of it, because like I said, I wasn't illiterate. It's just, I had a hard time coming up with things. Plus, when I got older and I wanted to I really kind of want to read this book, and I'll sit down to read it and I just start falling asleep and I just, because, it kind of brought up that, kind of Pavlovian response, right? Here's a book, it's punishment time. And then, I start to get sleepy because that's how I would get out of reading was I'd fall asleep and then I wouldn't have to read the book. And that was kind of how I got out of my punishment. So all that to be said is, I wanted to talk about this and bring this to some people's attention because I never really thought other people had this problem. And then looking and researching and kind of trying to figure out a couple of things out to do this episode, I was like, whoa, this is a big, I don't want to say problem, but kind of a problem, right? Where there's a large swath of people still to this day that are taught this old way of reading. It's called the 3Q method, whole word, sight words, where you're just taught to identify words and not the structure of the words. And that's the thing I was missing. So I was watching that video. I was like, man, this kid, I feel your pain because this is how I don't know how to read per se, right? The great thing about things nowadays is, I think this is why I was probably a little extra reading and getting into technology, because it was great where I could talk to a computer, or I could go on the internet and I could go to Webster's Dictionary or something like that or whatever, and click the little speaker button and pronounce the word for me. I'm like, oh, this is so great. Now it's so easy. I just, ask Google or something or I jump on my phone and you ask Siri or whatever. I'm like, I spell this word out and it tells me the word and it tells me the meaning. I'm like, okay, this is awesome. So I just kind of want to bring this information out there because, like I said, I felt like I was, very, very small minority of people that had this problem. Come to find out, it's not. So I think by bringing awareness to these things, if you or somebody is struggling with this, I think the hope of this episode is to give you some background, some tools, some stories, and then that either you or somebody or you love, a child or something like that you see has this problem. You're like, oh, this is a thing. I listened to the podcast about it, and then I know how to go get more information and find help and things like this, and not necessarily stigmatize anybody, either an adult or a child, or if you're feeling like this, like I only recently started talking about this. I never really thought about it. And I was being interviewed for a news article and the guy had asked me a question. And I was like, it was like, I think something like, what's the biggest struggle or something like that. I was like, cause I didn't read good. And I never really, not that I didn't want to share. I never thought about it. And I started sharing it. I was like, I started thinking about it and I was like, hey, you know what? I'll joke around here and there about it. Somebody would ask me something, I don't know how to spell that, or I can't read. I just joke around, which is a problem, right? So then, it's kind of my defense mechanism around the subject. And then so I started thinking about it. And then I seen that video. I was like, okay, I gotta talk about this. I gotta talk about my experience, the things that I learned how to learn about, like I said, I love learning. So I had to figure out ways around this. And with the modern era and technology and all these different things, and even AI and stuff, it can help so much. We all have, mostly all of us have a phone in our pocket, or, Echo or Alexa or something at home, or Google Home or something that we can talk to. And like I said, I'll be reading a book and I'll just start like, hey, what is this word? And I'll start spelling it out. And I'm like, most times I'm like, oh, Jesus, I know that word. But if I've never seen it written down, then I don't know the word. But once I see it written down and I know what it is, then I'm good, which is how I was taught. So that's how my brain still works. I do practice from time to time, especially when I had younger kids, sounding out words because I would learn from them. And then I kind of sort of know how to sound out words, and I kind of know some of the rules and stuff about spelling and whatever. The good thing about spell check is if you get kind of close, then it'll fix it for you. Like I said, once I see the word, I'm like, oh, that's the one I want. And then if I do get really just jammed up with this crazy not spelling it, then I'll just, on my phone or my computer or whatever, I'll hit the little microphone button and I'll just say the word I want. Sometimes I'll say it in the structure of a sentence so I get the right version of the word I want. Because, sometimes, there's there and there's whatever, 3 or 4 different versions of there, or you get sent and there's like several different versions of sent. So sometimes you got to say the structure of the sentence. And then once I see it, I'm like, okay, that's the one I want. So, and then through kind of putting this episode together, me and my co-writer here, AI, we're going through things and I was telling stories and I was putting stuff together. It identified, I guess maybe the reason why I do this show is the social chameleon strategy. This is like you develop this strategy to survive school. And I was like, well, I never really thought about that. And that's kind of the basis of the show, right? How can we adapt? How can we learn? How can we grow? How can we transform? Here it is, right? I score top 1% in ASVAB. I take AP English. You're like, but you can't read. Try taking AP English and not reading the book. Man, do you got to pay attention in class. But here we go. This is what I did. Like I said, I never read a single book in elementary, intermediate, high school, college. Never read a book. Not saying I scored super well on things, but I passed. And a lot of times I could talk well about it. So this is kind of the superpower I developed was I was able, or I was forced to really, really pay attention to the discussion in class, or I had to talk to other people that read the book. And I'm, oh yeah, so that's the only way, because I wasn't going to read that book. That's the only way I was able to grasp the knowledge of things. I did learn how to kind of skim through books and find things. Sometimes when we got like an open book kind of question or whatever, I would read the question and then I would try and go find the answer, because I had skimmed. Most times I would skim the book, depending on what was kind of going on. I would skim the book so I'd be like, I could go back and sort of figure out the answer. And, maybe it took me a little longer, but that's what I had to do to survive. So this is, kind of the thing, right? What do you got to do to transform, or maybe you are dyslexic or something like that or whatever, and being able to speak up and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this, and there's not any shame in it. And people do shame you. Shame sometimes can be good. It can be a catalyst for growth, but it's also, if you feel a certain kind of way about it and it's making it, this is your opportunity to get stronger, right? This is what we're talking about here, and then also maybe there was something that, because I wasn't so good at reading, maybe I really had a better ability to synthesize conversation better, or possibly for like a blind or deaf person, right? Their other sense gets heightened. So I think that might be something that kind of happened where my listening skills got so good and my retention from the conversation got so good, like in college and stuff like that. If the professor would have like a lecture class, I was golden. But if the professor didn't do the lecture style, man, I struggled, because I needed the lecture, because I wasn't going to read the material. I wasn't going to do it at all. But this also kind of makes me think about, we can't dismiss people, or we can't label people with these negative connotations just because maybe you're autistic or dyslexic or something like that, whatever. These people have a superpower, right? This is kind of what I've kind of discovered through this. Somehow I've gained a superpower because of my lack of proficient reading skills. I had to compensate other ways to fulfill my thirst for the knowledge, right? Audiobooks, podcasts, and things. And then through that, I started reading like on a Kindle or something like that, or like the Kindle apps. And then now your phone can read the book to you. And then as I'm, the book's going along, I'm reading along, I'm able to understand sentence structure and different things. I'm understand words and spelling and how they put things together. So through the adaptation of having this deficiency, I was able to gain greater skills, right? So if you have something like that, or you know somebody that's got one of these deficiencies or these things that we label as something's wrong with you, I disagree with that. They're just going to be really good at something that's uncommon. And we need more uncommon people, right? We need more people that are hyper focused, hyper diligent, vigilant in these very niche topics where they go so deep and they're just so good, and they start to connect things that the average person or the regular type of brain function isn't going to connect, right? So I think that's the good thing is I developed something like that. And so I still have that skill. And now I think I can read pretty good. I'm getting it better. The good thing about the podcast is good for me, maybe bad for you guys. Some of you guys listening is I'm working on my reading out loud skills, right? It's something I shied away from forever. I did not want to do it. Presenting a paper in class, if I had to read that, not wanting to do it. In college, you had to stand up in the front of the room and read your thing. Man, I'm not trying to do that. I was trying to memorize that. And, so I couldn't stumble and go through it, so I could fluently, read through. Like, I never read a teleprompter, but I can imagine that's not going to be fun the day I get to, do a teleprompter, just because I just got to work on the pace and the flow. I think, I feel like my brain goes faster than my mouth does. And then I do get nervous a little bit sometimes, but I'm working on it, right? I don't have the same beliefs. I've changed my beliefs. I don't have the belief of I can't read. I'm not a good reader. I'm not a good out loud reader. No, those are my stories. And I choose, just like you guys can choose whatever story you have, whatever belief you have. You can stop it at any time. You can stop adopting it at any time. It might not instantly go away at that moment, but you choose to continue this belief. You can fight for your limitations, or you can change them or get rid of them, and we can practice. I'm never going to be a 10 out of 10 out loud reader. I'm not doing audiobook recordings, but I think I can get to 5 or 6, which is huge improvement. Puts me probably in the average, right? But with my other developed skills, now I have this uncommon abilities, right? I have 3 or 4 different uncommon things coupled together. Now this makes me this unique skill set, this unique type of person, right? And then, I'm sorry, I'm just looking through my notes here, just kind of making sure I've hit everything so far I wanted to hit. And and that's the thing too, I was going through this because I was able to build these, I think, really good listening skills where I have to listen and have to pay attention very well. I think this makes it good for podcasts. I like to think I'm getting pretty good at interviewing people because I'm listening to things going on. I'm connecting things and stuff like that or whatever. So I guess, this kind of goes back to what I was saying, right? So you start stacking all these things and we get rid of the shame or, whatever, or we help out the person in our life that's having this so that they can get competent in these things. I probably never get to a true unconscious competence. When I get competent and comfortable, and then when you're relaxed and like I'm not so nervous anymore, and that makes me stumble upon things less because I've become more competent, and then with that becomes I develop more confidence. So this is some of the things I learned about the reading styles through researching this episode. There's whole word versus phonics, which is sounding things out. And then, so this whole word approach came about in the late 70s. And then definitely if you were in elementary school in the early 80s and, the 90s, and that's apparently still in some districts now, school districts now, they still do teach this method. And this is when, in the 80s is when this really started taking over the education system. And this whole word theory, and that's all it really was. It was a theory this guy came up with. So in 1975, I might butcher his name, but I'm gonna go with it. Stenovich, something like that. And a fellow graduate student set out to test the idea in their lab. They recruited researchers of various ages and abilities and gave them a series of word reading tasks. Their hypothesis was that the skilled readers rely more on contextual cues to recognize words than poor readers, who probably weren't as good at using context. They couldn't have been more wrong. And it quotes here, it says, "To our surprise, all of our research results pointed in the opposite direction," Stovich wrote. "It was the poor readers, more than the skilled readers, who were more reliant on context to facilitate word recognition." So you see that there? The poor readers use this 3Q method, the context, instead of understanding word recognition and how to sound it out with the phonics. Instead, it goes on to say here, the skilled readers could instantly recognize words without relying on context. Other researchers have confirmed these findings with similar experiments. It turns out that the ability to read words in isolation quickly and accurately is a hallmark of being a skilled reader. This is now one of the most consistent and well replicated findings in all of reading research. And then, so the 3 cueing method, which is an alternative method, whole word, sight word, all that kind of stuff. It's called the MSV system. You're taught to guess, look at pictures, or predict. It never taught you to decode. So MSV stands for using meaning to figure out what a word is. So the beginning of the sentence, the end of the sentence, figuring out, okay, what word kind of goes here, which comes with experience, right? And S for using sentence structure, and V for using visual information. Like, are you reading a picture book? Is there pictures accompanying this? Maybe, there's something to the theme and you try to guess a word based on the theme of the book. There's a bunch of different things. And it's funny, it kind of just reminds me, my son, when we watch like a movie or show or something like that, whatever, I'm constantly predicting the dialogue ahead of time. And he's like, how do you do that? And through reading through these techniques and stuff, I wonder if, because I had to get so good at word prediction, sentence prediction, why I'm able to predict dialogue almost 100% accurate. If not, it's very much the gist of exactly what they're saying. A lot of times it's word for word, and he's just constantly astounded. I think my wife is too sometimes. She's like, how did you know they were going to say that? I was like, to me, I'm like, it's obvious that's what they're going to say. That's the next predicted word, right? So I'm predicting a sentence structure, something that's encoded and ingrained in my brain. And this comes back to why the word speedometer stumped me, right? I couldn't guess it from the context because I'd never seen the word. So, and even if I did or didn't have a picture of it, I didn't have the concept that that's what they were talking about, right? So this is where I became helpless with the decoding, without the code, right? I couldn't look at that word and say, speedometer, because it doesn't sound or feel similar to speedometer. Those letters sound different. So this is where, in that story, I lacked because I didn't have the context. I lacked the context. I lacked the awareness. I didn't have the skill for sounding out words and then putting things together. Is why I wasn't able to decode that. So the new way, which is very interesting, I read about this. I will have some pretty extensive detailed show notes. Without overwhelming things. I picked out a bunch of top sources. I found this amazing podcast and website. I think there's like 14 episodes plus a bunch of, maybe it's like 20 episodes. She goes all into this whole thing. I just kind of started it. I listened to a little bit and I read a bunch of articles on their site, getting ready for this episode. But I highly encourage you, if you're interested in this more, going and checking out the show notes and getting the link to this thing, and then how this is going through the legislature and different things, and how they're advocating for all these different things is great. So real quick, the science of reading, which is how they want everybody in America. I obviously believe they're doing this in Europe as well, in the English-speaking regions, because I forget what it was. They use a different style, and they're also finding that different style is not working out for them. So the new way is the science of reading is decades of brain and education research that all point to the same thing. Kids read best when they're taught the code of written English directly and systematically. Phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, and then given rich language and knowledge so that they can understand what they read. So the phonemic awareness is hearing and working with the individual sounds and spoken words. The phonics is the decoding, right? Teaching which letters and letter patterns spell which sounds and how to blend them to read unfamiliar words. And then fluency, reading with speed, accuracy, and expression, so the brain has left room to think about meaning. So those are the two I have trouble with, right? Is the decoding, and then the fluency. I get sped up and then I come to a word. I think, we've probably heard it here as I'm reading this, but I'm really getting better. I'm really trying hard on this. I'll speed up, because that's kind of how my brain likes things. And then I'll come to a word and it's just like this, the flow is not good. It's just boom, 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 boom. It's just big pauses and these big things, especially as I'm flying into the word, I start to get a little nervous, like, oh, practice that one. What was it again? Right. And then we have vocabulary and background knowledge, knowing enough words and word knowledge that the text actually makes sense. So this is the science of reading. It's a great thing. Like I said, there's going to be some resources and things to get either you or your loved ones, or your child in your life, if they're struggling with this, or maybe even to help accelerate the process and deepen the understanding. There's going to be some good resources for you guys. I've learned a lot. And like I said, I'm going to continue to enjoy that podcast series and learn more about this. And I know I alluded to earlier in here, I don't have a shame about this anymore. I used to be, feel a little dumb or something, or be kind of shameful to ask my kid, or, ask a friend, like, how do you spell this thing? Now I don't, maybe it's just getting older or whatever. Maybe it's just coming to the thing like, hey, I'm working on this. This is something I'm working on. Like I said, I'm probably going to be a 5 or 6 out of this my whole life, no matter how hard I work on it. Not my thing. Not an excuse, just a reality, right? I can and I am rewire my brain. These are no longer my beliefs. I've changed that. I'm working on getting better at it. But there's tools. So we talked about it, right? I talk to my computer. There's, when I come across an article before and it'd be this big, long, I'm not reading this, And now you can have the article read out loud to you, phones and computers and whatnot. There's apps, there's programs. A lot of things are built in for the visually impaired. So you can just turn these on and it'll read things out to you. Kindle and stuff like that. You can turn these things on and it'll read the words out to you. So don't be shameful until you learn and you get better. Or if you get stumped, use these tools. There's no shame in it, right? It's like a muscle where you got to train it. We got to do this. And there's going to be ancillary benefits, right? You're going to get the knowledge you're looking for. You're going to get a great story that you've been wanting to read. Maybe you want to read the Harry Potter books or something like that, or some big novel series. And these books are, 8 inches thick, and you're like, but when you're able to use this technology and you're able to go through these things, there's going to unlock opportunities for you. It's going to unlock knowledge. There's so much knowledge built up in things. There's so much potential. You got to imagine, what does it take to make a good book, right? Let's go with nonfiction, right? This person has probably spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars gaining this knowledge, running this business, whatever it was, took all that from probably decades of experience, distilled that down into whatever, 400 word book, pass that on to you for $29.95. Right? So you got a problem, you got a situation, you got a thing you're working towards, a thing. I remember my business just stalled at $1 million revenue. Man, I don't know how to lead this team. Oh, I don't know how to, get my child to do this thing. Well, guess what? Where's all the knowledge locked up? It's in books, right? So don't be ashamed of, like, oh, if I put on an audiobook, that's not reading. That's reading, right? We can argue if that's reading or not. I'm not here. That's neither here nor there. You're getting the knowledge, right? You're finding the solutions. You're finding the answers to your questions. You're gaining knowledge in a subject you're interested in, or you're getting interested in a subject matter. You're trying to be proficient. You're trying to do whatever. As a new hobby, you want to, there's a woodworking book or something, whatever it is, right? Don't be ashamed. Use the tools out there. There's so many things. Explore your phone, explore your computer, explore your iPad. There's so many different ways to help you through this stuff. There's so many ways to highlight words, define them, help you say them, right? These are all the things I've learned that's helped me. I go through 30 plus books a year. The last I looked at my Goodreads, I was over 500 books I've read. And that's just what I've logged in Goodreads. I'm sure there's tons of things that before I started using Goodreads that I don't remember reading or whatever. I know time to time I come across a book and I read that. I'll throw it in there. But this is where the knowledge is locked up. These are where think about this, right? You get a biography of a successful business person in your industry or not in your industry, but somebody that's been there and done this. Imagine how many years of knowledge and experience step forward you're going to get, right? This person is going to be your unofficial mentor. You're going to be able to learn from their mistakes and the things. I mean, imagine reading about Dyson or Steve Jobs or Michael Dell, and I mean, so many great, the Founders Podcast. This guy goes through it. That's a great resource, but that's where these things are, right? They're locked up in books. Yes, we are lucky now. There are podcasts and stuff to go through, but sometimes maybe it's better, or maybe it's preferable. I don't know. Is to, you got the podcast and then boom, you go grab the audiobook, or you grab the Kindle version, you grab the hardcover or whatever. You go into your local library, you borrow it. You go on your Libby app and you borrow the book, or you borrow the audiobook, right? This is where the knowledge is. This is where you can step up your skills. This is where you can learn, grow, transform into the person you want to become, into becoming legendary, whatever legendary means to you and for your family and for whatever, right? So don't be shameful. I've let shame go. Use the tools. And I'm trying to see. I'm just looking at my notes here, and this kind of leads me to the conclusion here. This is I start to wrap this up. I think I've kind of rambled on enough about my thing. Stop feeling stupid if you can't spell or read fast or whatever it is, right? You might be running old software. Maybe you're stuck on Windows 95 and you keep getting blue screen. Guess what? Let's upgrade software. Let's let go of beliefs. I think that's a big thing, is recognizing there's a problem, recognizing maybe even now that you recognize that there is this kind of problem, now you can say, oh, I think I have some of this, or I think I have that, or maybe, maybe I do have dyslexia, or maybe there is something going on, right? Maybe, I keep seeing some studies and stuff come out where the more short form content and stuff we go through, the less we can handle reading. So maybe it's something we need to pick back up the habit of, right? Maybe it's just, I'm just going to read a paragraph today. Maybe it's just going to read a page today. It's got to be something we get back into, right? So let's upgrade the beliefs. Let's upgrade the software if we need to. Let's not be shameful. Let's find these things. Let's find the unlocks. Let's find, even if it's just the joy of a fantasy novel or something like that, whatever you're into, right? I know there's books out there. There's things out there. Reading to your child. How freaking scary it was to read to my 2-year-old. I had to pre-scan the book and make sure I knew the words. So many times I would stumble through it, but it helped me get better, and it helped me kind of come over that. And, he didn't care. He just wanted to see the story. He wanted to hear the story. And of course it was again. I'm like, man, but guess what I got good at? I got good at reading out loud. I'm getting better. Like I said, we drop the beliefs, we upgrade the software, and we keep going. And to reiterate, I got a bunch of stuff from my research and the things I read, and also just some, blanket definition type things, background on things. So if you want to dig deep in here, you want to jump down the rabbit hole of this for yourself or for a child or somebody, go in there. This is going to be a jumping off point. I highly, highly recommend, if you're interested in it, it's the APM reports, and it's the Sold the Story podcast. There's 2 articles that I really enjoyed. The one article is where I was like, holy crap, this lady just went through everything what happened in my life. That's what got me on this thing. And then there's a new article about how they're helping change the laws and stuff in different states, and also the podcast series. Like I said, I just started. I'm liking it. I want to learn more about this. I have a thirst for knowledge. I like learning things. And the biggest unlock, so many years of my life, I don't want to say I wasted, but I didn't give myself the opportunity to learn and read and grow my knowledge, and I just spend time fucking around and avoiding this and avoiding this and avoiding this. So I don't want you to waste any more time than I already wasted for us. There's a bunch of different things. I put 2 of the top programs that I found. I'm not betting these. I'm just, from everything I researched out, these are the 2 top programs. It helps adults as well and children with phonics programs. So there's 2 of those researchers in there for you guys if you need to go find a professional route. And as always, guys, we need a mission. We need something to do. This week's challenge, I want you to find something you're struggling with, something you're not good at. Then ask yourself whether you're actually bad at it or you just need a different tool to bypass the friction. Have you abandoned the belief? I'm sorry. Have you adopted? Okay. I'm gonna start the challenge over here quick. Find something you're struggling with, something you're not good at. Then ask yourself whether you're actually bad at it or you just need a different tool to bypass the friction. Have you adopted the belief? I'm bad at math. I'm not a good reader. I'm not athletic. Is it time for a software upgrade? And we don't want you to try and go from a skill level of I'm currently a 2 and the best I could be is a 5. But within that same vein, we want to make sure we're fluent enough to ask the right questions, have a base level of knowledge so you're not getting taken advantage of or scammed, and we're able to audit somebody that works for us or whom we hire. This skill level is something we need to hire. So if you're in this, let's say, it's cut off maybe like 5 or 6. So if you think the best you can get are you're currently at a 5 or a 6, these are something we want to, these are skills we want to hire for. These are positions we want to hire for, whether it's through software or outsourcing or bringing somebody in. We want to work on skills that we're currently, 6, 7, 8, and we think we can get, or we know with a little extra work, we can get to a 9 or 10. Well, now we're talking about world class, right? Don't use this as an excuse to not get better at something. I want you to be self-aware enough to know this is not your natural aptitude or an area you can excel at, but something you can improve. Don't use this as an excuse to skip out, oh, I'm not good at that, so I'm not doing it. No. We need to improve, but we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on a skill that we can only be a 5 at best, right? Or something like that. We can go from a 2 to a 4. Let's not spend a lot of time on that, but let's get competent, right? We want to have this competency so we're not getting scammed. We can understand, we can have a basic conversation. We can ask the right questions. And with that, guys, you know the deal. You know how we do it here at the Social Community Show. There's no paywall. There's no premium content. If you go to the show notes, we're not locking you out. Everything's there. So the one thing we do ask is, do you want to support the show? You want to support the things? We've given you everything up front. I've tried to do my best to convey this message. I went out and spent several, days, weeks, months thinking about this, gathering information, doing that stuff. So if you found this episode valuable, somebody that's struggling with this, or somebody that's got a child or somebody that's struggling with this, share this with them, share this with at least 2 other people. And if you want, you can connect with us all week long in between episodes on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, or your favorite podcast player. For episodes and links to everything we've discussed here today, head over to thesocialchameleon.show. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and transforming on your path to becoming legendary.